Abandoned asylums and institutions are some of the darkest remnants of history, often leaving behind whispers of the past and stories too horrifying to ignore. These institutions, once designed to care for the most vulnerable, now stand as decaying monuments to human suffering and neglect. In the silence of their crumbling walls, there are tales of strange occurrences, inexplicable glitches in the fabric of reality. Today, we explore the darkest glitches found in these forsaken places, where the veil between the past and present is thinner than you might think. Let's delve into 10 terrifying glitch stories from abandoned asylums. Story 1. The Vanishing Ward. The wind howled through the desolate trees as a group of urban explorers set out for what they believed would be a thrilling adventure in an abandoned asylum deep in the Midwest. This once grand institution, now a hollowed-out shell of its former self, had become notorious for its decaying architecture, dark past, and whispered rumors of hauntings. The asylum had been closed down decades ago after reports of inhumane treatment and strange occurrences, yet the structure still stood, sagging under the weight of time and neglect. The explorers, eager to capture the eerie remnants of a place that had once housed so many, ventured past the rusted gates, their hearts racing with excitement and a touch of trepidation. The atmosphere inside the asylum was suffocatingly quiet, with only the occasional creak of the building settling under the weight of time. Dust hung heavy in the air, and the musty scent of mold and decay filled their lungs as they moved deeper into the structure. As they moved through the halls, the explorers were struck by the strange and unsettling aura of the place. Paint peeled off the walls in thick strips, exposing the cracked plaster beneath, while the wooden floorboards groaned under their weight. Every step felt like a misstep, every sound magnified in the oppressive silence. Their flashlights flickered as they ventured further, illuminating ghostly remnants of a forgotten era. Old hospital beds, rusted medical equipment, and faded photographs that once held the memories of those who had lived and suffered here. But it was when they reached the end of a long, winding corridor that they discovered something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. At the farthest point of the hall, they found a door, slightly ajar. The air around it seemed unnaturally cold, even colder than the rest of the building. It beckoned them forward, as though it were drawing them into a secret no one had uncovered in years. As the explorers approached, they felt a strange chill run down their spines, a cold that wasn't entirely natural, a sense that something about this room was deeply wrong. One of them, Mark, pushed the door open, revealing a room shrouded in darkness. The light from their flashlights barely pierced the gloom as they stepped inside. And then, something astonishing. The room appeared untouched by the ravages of time. In an asylum that had stood empty for so many years, where decay had claimed everything in its path, this room looked almost pristine. The furniture was arranged neatly, chairs placed perfectly around an old wooden table, their faded upholstery worn but intact. The bed frames, stripped of their sheets long ago, still had faded linens draped across them, as though someone had recently made the beds. Everything was eerily perfect. It was as if the room had been frozen in time. A sense of unease crept up their spines as they glanced at each other, exchanging looks of confusion. Why was this room so pristine? Why did it seem untouched when everything else in the asylum was rotting away? As Mark stepped further into the room to take a photograph, the others followed closely behind. The door behind them creaked shut, but when they tried to push it open, they discovered it was locked. The air grew heavier, and suddenly, they began to hear something soft, distinct footsteps pacing in the room ahead. Slow, measured, and then a sudden chill that made their breath freeze in their throats. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Maybe it's the wind," Mark suggested, though he didn't quite believe it himself. The footsteps continued, deliberate, as though someone who shouldn't have been there, was walking around the room. They tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to set in as the footsteps became louder and more insistent, like someone was pacing back and forth, getting closer and closer to them. With every breath, the cold in the room grew more intense, as if the temperature had dropped by several degrees in a matter of seconds. They all stood frozen, their ears straining to catch a glimpse of what was happening inside the room. The footsteps were now accompanied by a soft, almost inaudible breathing sound, like someone was in the room with them, watching. But there was no way to see through the solid door. Their flashlights flickered and dimmed, their batteries draining at an alarming rate, making it harder to see anything around them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door gave way with a loud creak. They rushed inside, their hearts pounding in their chests, only to be met with the starkest of contradictions. The room was now completely different. The furniture, once so perfectly arranged, was in disarray. The chairs had been knocked over, the bed linens scattered across the floor as though someone had left in a hurry. But there was one thing missing: the person who had been walking in the room. There was no sign of them. No trace. No one in sight. It was as if the person who had been pacing had vanished into thin air, leaving only the remnants of their presence behind. Mark's camera, still in his hand, had captured something on film, though no one had noticed it at the time. When they later checked the images, they saw something they couldn't explain. The room, once neat, now had a shadow standing at the far corner, a dark silhouette that wasn't there when they entered. The shadow seemed to loom, faint and indistinct, but unmistakable, and it wasn't human. What had they experienced in that room? Was it a ghost, a manifestation of the spirits that once inhabited this place? Or had they, for just a moment, slipped through a crack in time and witnessed something from the past? No one knew for sure, but the memory of that room, the vanishing ward, haunted them all long after they left the asylum. It was as though the room was a living thing, holding secrets no one was meant to uncover. And though the explorers escaped the building, the terror of what they had encountered that day would follow them forever. Story 2. The flickering lights of Echo Asylum. Nestled in the outskirts of a long-forgotten town stood the decaying remains of Echo Asylum, a once feared mental institution that had closed its doors decades ago. Its tragic history was marred by rumors of mistreatment, unregulated experiments, and the unexplained disappearances of patients who had never left. Over the years, the asylum's name became synonymous with paranormal phenomena, with whispers of restless spirits that never found peace. Despite the countless stories of the building's eerie nature, few had dared to enter the asylum's darkened halls. But a small group of paranormal investigators, eager to document the supernatural activity, prepared for a night that would test their courage and sanity. Armed with night vision cameras, voice recorders, and all the latest ghost hunting equipment, they made their way into the crumbling institution, ready to uncover its secrets. The building greeted them with a hollow silence. The air was thick with dust and the smell of mold, and the only sounds were the soft shuffle of their feet and the occasional creak of the dilapidated structure shifting under the weight of time. The investigators split into two groups, each venturing down separate hallways. The walls were stained with time, faded paint, cracked plaster, and broken windows that let in the faintest slivers of moonlight. Every step seemed to echo louder than the last, as if the building itself was listening, waiting for something. As the team ventured deeper into the asylum, they came across the patient rooms. These chambers, once meant to provide care and refuge, were now in ruin. Rotting furniture lay scattered across the floors. Broken glass from old windows crunched beneath their feet, and the cold, damp air seemed to carry a heavy presence. It wasn't long before they entered the first room, their equipment poised and ready to capture whatever they might encounter. For the first few moments, there was nothing unusual. The silence of the room hung heavy, interrupted only by the sound of their breath. But then, it happened. The lights above them, which they had assumed were long dead, flickered on. At first, it was just a momentary flicker, nothing more than an odd anomaly. But then, they flickered again, this time more erratically, as though struggling to stay lit. The investigators exchanged glances, skeptical but intrigued. They checked the wiring and found nothing. The electrical system, it seemed, was completely inert. The lights had been dead for years, and yet, here they were, flickering with a strange life of their own. As they stood there, trying to make sense of it, the flickering became more intense, almost synchronized with their every movement. The lights blinked in rapid succession, casting long, trembling shadows across the room. The atmosphere grew unnervingly cold, and the air became thick with static. The team felt it, too, the undeniable sensation that something was watching them, something just beyond their reach. The lights flickered violently, plunging them into total darkness for a few moments, before they returned to their normal state. When the room came back into view, the investigators gasped in horror. On the fogged-up window at the far side of the room was a single word, written in the condensation: "Help." The word was scrawled hastily, as if someone or something had desperately tried to communicate. The investigators felt a shiver run down their spines. They rushed to the window, pressing their hands against the glass, but the outside view was obscured by a thick layer of grime. There was no way anyone had written that message from outside. They checked again, thoroughly, yet the fogged window was the only thing that had changed in the room. Panic began to set in, but they remained determined to continue their investigation. The team moved on to other rooms, but the lights followed them, flickering with increasing violence as they went. Every room they entered, the same glitch occurred, lights flickering on and off in erratic patterns, as if the building itself was responding to their presence. Each time they tried to check the wiring or the electrical systems, they found no explanation. The power should have been off, but the lights seemed to have a life of their own. As the hours passed, the phenomenon grew more chaotic. The lights no longer simply flickered. They began to flash, casting strobe-like bursts of light that filled the room with harsh, unnatural intensity. The team's flashlights began to die one by one, their batteries draining at an impossible rate, as though something within the asylum was draining the power from their equipment. Despite checking everything, the team found no reasonable cause for the phenomenon. The electrical grid was supposed to be completely shut down. And yet, the lights were acting as if they were alive in a way that defied all logic. The team's nerves were starting to fray. They had come expecting strange occurrences, but this was something beyond anything they had prepared for. Every time they moved to a new room, the lights flickered more wildly, flashing like a strobe light. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally across the walls, warping and distorting in ways that made their heads spin. The air felt charged, thick with static, and their voices were lost in the overwhelming hum of electrical energy. At one point, as the lights flickered uncontrollably, the room grew unbearably cold. The team could see their breath in the air, even though the building was unheated. One of the investigators, Sarah, heard something faint, soft whispers in the distance. She turned, but there was no one there. Then came the sound, footsteps, echoing across the floor above them, steady and methodical, as though someone or something was walking just out of sight. It grew louder, closer, until it felt as if the footsteps were right behind them. But when they turned around, they found no one. The team's cameras caught the strange anomaly on film. When they reviewed the footage later, they saw something that made their stomachs churn. At the exact moment the lights flickered in the video, there was a shadow moving across the room, something that shouldn't have been there. A dark, fleeting figure, barely visible, but unmistakably present. The figure was moving in and out of the light, as though trying to stay hidden. There was no sign of anyone in the room at the time, no physical presence to explain what they were seeing on film. Exhausted, shaken, and desperate for answers, the team decided to leave. But as they made their way to the front door, they realized something terrifying. The lights flickered once more, one last time, before going out completely. The building seemed to sigh, its ancient walls creaking as if releasing a breath they hadn't known it was holding. And as they exited, the oppressive darkness closed in behind them, leaving the asylum to once again fall silent. The team left that night, their footage in hand, but they were forever haunted by the flickering lights. No one could explain what had happened in Echo Asylum, but one thing was certain. The asylum, with all its dark history and restless spirits, was still very much alive in its own way. Story 3. The Echo of Patient Laughter. In the heart of a small, desolate town stood the crumbling remains of St. Mary's Asylum, a once magnificent institution known for its brutal treatment of its patients. By the time the asylum had closed its doors, the dark rumors surrounding its history had already reached the ears of many. A history filled with unexplainable disappearances, harsh treatments, and whispers of madness that lingered in the walls. The upper floors, once home to the most notorious patients, were particularly feared patients who had allegedly gone insane from the cruel and unorthodox methods that were employed there. Despite the chilling reputation of the place, a team of documentary filmmakers had been granted rare access to film in the abandoned asylum. Their goal was to capture the essence of this forsaken building, to uncover the truth of its haunting history. Armed with cameras, audio equipment, and the eagerness to create something that would send shivers down the spine of their viewers, the team entered the darkened halls, eager to document the echoes of the past. From the moment they stepped inside, a thick, suffocating silence wrapped around them. The air was musty, heavy with the scent of mildew and rot, and the once grand architecture now stood in a sad state of decay. The walls were cracked, the floors uneven, and the windows, boarded up for years, allowed only slivers of pale daylight to filter through. The place felt hollow, yet alive in an inexplicable way. As they set up their equipment on the upper floors, the filmmakers couldn't help but feel the oppressive weight of the asylum's history pressing down on them. The upper floors, where the most troubled and notorious patients had been kept, were the most dilapidated. The rooms were bare except for the remnants of broken furniture and peeling paint, and the atmosphere was thick with the lingering energy of those who had once been imprisoned here. The filmmakers, undeterred by the unsettling surroundings, began preparing their cameras and microphones. But then, something strange happened. As they adjusted their equipment and prepared to begin filming, a sound echoed through the hallways. A soft, distant noise at first. Something almost indistinct. It could have been the wind, or perhaps the sound of their own movements. But then, it grew clearer. A low, unsettling sound that carried through the empty halls. A laughter, faint at first, then gradually growing louder. The filmmakers paused, exchanging uneasy glances. It didn't sound like a normal laugh. It was high-pitched, childlike, but with an edge, sharp, hollow, and filled with an unnatural, manic energy. A laugh that didn't belong in this place. A laugh that seemed to come from nowhere yet everywhere all at once. The team looked at each other, their faces pale. They checked the rooms nearby, convinced that one of their team members was playing a prank, but they found nothing. The floors below them were empty. No one was in the building except for the filmmakers. And yet, the sound continued, bouncing off the walls as if coming from every direction. It was as though the very building itself was laughing at them. "Did anyone else hear that?" one of the filmmakers asked, her voice trembling. "I thought it was just me," another whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Despite the growing unease among the group, they tried to continue filming. But every time they attempted to focus on their work, the laughter grew louder, more intense. It reverberated through the empty halls, an unsettling sound that seemed to fill every corner of the building. It came from nowhere and everywhere, like the asylum itself was alive and mocking them. The laughter wasn't just an eerie sound. It was unnervingly close, as though it was emanating from the very floorboards beneath their feet. The sound of it seemed to vibrate in the walls, each burst of laughter sending chills down their spines. It felt as if the building was alive with the memories of the patients who had once walked these halls, their anguish and madness twisted into an impossible, haunting sound. "Okay, that's enough," one filmmaker said, his voice shaky as he packed up his equipment. "This is getting too weird." But no matter how hard they tried, the laughter wouldn't stop. The closer they got to leaving, the more intense the sound became. The walls seemed to pulse with it, and each time they moved from one room to another, the laughter followed. It was as if the building knew they were trying to leave, and the more they attempted to escape, the louder the echoes of insanity became. Panicked, the team made their way toward the exit, their hearts pounding in their chests. The laughter, now a frenzied cacophony, seemed to chase them down the halls, swirling around them, mocking their fear. With a final burst of energy, they ran out of the asylum, the oppressive sound still echoing in their ears. But the terror didn't end when they left. Over the following days, the filmmakers began to notice something strange. At first, it was subtle, small, almost imperceptible audio glitches in their recordings. Unexplained static, faint whispers. Then, more disturbingly, strange laughter began to appear in their footage. Laughter that wasn't there when they had been filming. No one had been present when the sounds were recorded, yet the eerie, childlike laughter was unmistakable, filling the silence of the asylum. It was as though the spirits of St. Mary's had attached themselves to the footage, following the team home. The more they tried to listen to the recordings, the more distorted the laughter became. Sometimes it sounded like it was right behind them, like someone was in the room with them, laughing in the shadows. Other times, it echoed from the speakers at odd intervals, sharp and manic, until it made their skin crawl. It wasn't just a glitch. It was as though the asylum itself was reaching out, using the recordings as a bridge between worlds. The filmmakers tried to delete the files, but the laughter always returned. No matter what they did, the audio glitch persisted, haunting them at every turn. They even contacted experts, but no one could explain the phenomenon. It wasn't just an audio issue. It was something more, something tied to the asylum, its dark past, and the restless souls that still wandered its halls. Eventually, the filmmakers abandoned the project, unable to escape the haunting laughter that followed them wherever they went. But the echoes of St. Mary's Asylum remained with them, forever etched into their memories. The laughter, once a fleeting sound in the empty halls of the asylum, had become an unshakable presence in their lives, a reminder that some places, some memories, never truly let go. Story 4. The Phantom Patient. In the heart of the East Coast, tucked away from prying eyes, stood one of the oldest and most notorious asylums in the country. Its history was filled with dark secrets, stories of cruel experiments, questionable treatments, and patients who had simply vanished without a trace. The asylum, now abandoned and falling apart, had become a place of legend. Over the years, many had tried to uncover the truth behind its mysteries, but few had come back with anything concrete. The stories of a mysterious patient who disappeared under bizarre circumstances were particularly chilling. But it wasn't the disappearance itself that terrified those who heard it. It was the glitch that seemed to occur in the aftermath. Jake, a young and ambitious photographer known for his fascination with abandoned places, was one of the few who dared to explore the forgotten asylum. He had heard the rumors, whispers of the missing patient and the strange happenings that followed their disappearance, and he felt a pull to uncover the truth. For his latest project, he ventured into the decaying halls of the asylum, armed with his camera and a keen sense of curiosity. The building greeted him with a foul stench of mildew, mold, and rot. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of years of neglect. Dust motes floated lazily in the dim light that filtered through the cracked windows, and the floor creaked with every step he took. His boots echoed in the vast, empty corridors, the silence oppressive and unnerving. Every once in a while, he would hear a distant noise, a bang or a creak, but when he turned to investigate, there was nothing there. Jake was undeterred. His camera clicked rapidly as he documented the derelict beauty of the asylum: broken windows, rusted metal doors, peeling paint, and forgotten belongings left behind by those who had once lived there. The further he explored, the more he felt the weight of the building's past, as if the walls themselves were holding onto something that didn't want to be forgotten. He finally made his way to the ward where the patient had vanished all those years ago. This was where the most bizarre and unsettling events had been reported, the ward where a patient had been seen one day and was gone the next, with no sign of how or why they disappeared. No trace. Just an empty room, a missing person, and a mystery that had never been solved. Jake stepped cautiously into the hallway of the ward. It was long and narrow, the floor covered in debris, the walls cracked and sagging. The silence here was almost unbearable, and the feeling of being watched lingered at the back of his mind. He snapped photos of the walls of the abandoned rooms, trying to capture the essence of the place, but something felt off, like a presence that didn't belong. Then, he saw it. At the far end of the hallway, standing in the shadows, was a figure. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a trick of the light, perhaps a fellow explorer or a shadow cast by a broken window. But as Jake stepped forward, the figure didn't move. It didn't shift or react in any way, as if it were frozen in place. It wasn't just still, it was wrong. The details were blurry, indistinct, as if the figure was not quite solid. It was like looking at a distorted reflection in a cracked mirror. Jake felt his heart rate increase as he approached. He called out to the figure, his voice echoing through the empty hall. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, but the figure didn't respond. No movement, no acknowledgement. The silence between them grew, stretching out uncomfortably. Jake's instincts told him to turn back, but his curiosity got the better of him. As he took another step forward, something even more unsettling happened. The figure disappeared. It didn't fade slowly. It didn't retreat into the shadows. One moment, the figure was there, standing at the end of the hall, and the next, it was gone, vanished into thin air, leaving nothing but an eerie, unnatural stillness behind. Jake froze in place. His breath caught in his throat. He glanced around, but there was no sign of anyone, no footsteps, no sounds. Nothing to indicate how the figure had disappeared so quickly. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Something wasn't right. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the sensation of time and space warping around him, as though the fabric of reality itself had been stretched thin. Jake hesitated, then reluctantly continued his exploration. But the image of the disappearing figure stayed with him, nagging at his thoughts. Later, after leaving the asylum and back in the comfort of his studio, Jake went over the photos he had taken. He scrolled through the images on his camera, analyzing the shots one by one. As he looked at a photo of the hallway where the figure had stood, his breath caught. There, just behind the place where the figure had vanished, was a blurry silhouette. At first, he thought it was just another glitch, a mistake from the camera, a lens flare. But the more he looked at it, the more it became apparent that the figure was no mistake. The silhouette was of a person, but it wasn't just any person. The details were too faint, too ghostly, but it was unmistakable. The shape of an old patient, one who had gone missing decades ago. The same patient who had vanished without a trace. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The figure from the hallway had not been a trick of his mind. It was as if the camera had captured something that shouldn't have been there, something from the past, leaking into the present. It was as if the glitch in time had allowed him to see into a moment long gone. The patient who had disappeared was not just a memory. They were still there, in some form, forever stuck in the asylum's walls. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a result of his camera's settings. But deep down, Jake knew what he had seen. He knew that something had shifted, something had fractured in time itself, allowing a glimpse into the past. The glitch was real. The patient, long gone, had somehow returned, if only for a moment. Jake's fascination with the asylum grew into an obsession. He returned to the building several times, hoping to capture more of the eerie presence that seemed to haunt its halls. But no matter how many times he went back, he never encountered the phantom figure again. It was as though the glitch had been a one-time occurrence, a singular moment in time that allowed him to glimpse a past that should have stayed buried. And yet, every time he reviewed the photos from that day, he couldn't shake the feeling that the asylum was still holding on to something. The patient, the ghost, or perhaps the very fabric of time itself, still lingered in that place. And as for Jake, he would never forget the unsettling truth that he had seen more than just an abandoned building that day. He had seen a distortion in reality, one that had allowed him to witness the past bleeding into the present in a way that defied all logic. Story 5. The Time Loop of Hillview Asylum. Tucked away in the remote outskirts of a forgotten town lies Hillview Asylum, a sprawling, rotting monument to the darker side of history. Once hailed as a sanctuary for those suffering from mental illness, it slowly became infamous for its unspeakable treatments, endless corridors, and the patients who were never seen again. Though it had been abandoned for decades, the building still seemed to breathe, its bones creaking with secrets it refused to let go. It was in the dead of autumn that a group of 4 seasoned urban explorers, Sam, Rachel, Luis, and Ava, decided to investigate Hillview. They had explored abandoned malls, churches, and even shuttered prisons, but something about Hillview felt different. Maybe it was the rumors of people getting stuck in the building. Not physically trapped, but temporarily lost. People spoke in hushed tones of endless corridors and the feeling of living the same moment over and over. Naturally, this only made the group more eager to explore it. They arrived just as the sun was setting, the last golden rays vanishing behind the asylum's broken silhouette. With flashlights, backpacks, chalk for marking walls, and cameras rolling, they stepped through the rusted entrance, the door whining like something in pain. Inside, the air was heavy with mildew and the faint scent of rusted iron. The hallways stretched long and narrow, lit only by the dim glow of their flashlights. As they advanced deeper into the asylum, the building seemed to close in around them, absorbing sound, isolating each footstep in the silence. That's when it began. Sam, walking slightly ahead of the others, paused. He had an intense feeling of déjà vu. The pattern of tiles on the floor, the shape of the cracks in the ceiling. It felt eerily familiar. He stopped and looked around. "Hey," he said softly, "haven't we been here already?" Luis frowned. "We came in from the west wing. This is the central corridor. It's just symmetrical." Rachel nodded slowly, but she too looked uneasy. "Still, I feel like I've seen this exact corner before. The peeling paint on that wall. It looks identical to the hallway we were in 10 minutes ago." Ava, ever the skeptic, shrugged it off. "These buildings are designed like mazes. It's probably just playing tricks on our brains." But the tricks didn't stop. As they moved through the asylum, They began noticing repeating details: an old wheelchair tipped on its side, a cracked mirror mounted too high on the wall, and a broken medical gurney that appeared again and again. At first, they thought they were doubling back unintentionally. But when they marked a door with chalk and returned to find the same door without any markings, panic began to set in. Time started to feel elastic. They checked their watches. 15 minutes had passed since they entered, or had it been an hour? No one was sure anymore. Every turn led them to the same hallway. Every door opened to a room they swore they had just visited. The peeling wallpaper seemed to be mocking them, curling in identical patterns, like a repeating texture in a broken video game. Luis tried to leave breadcrumbs using scraps of paper, but they vanished moments later. Ava marked an entire hallway with bright orange chalk. When they turned back minutes later, the chalk was gone, the wall untouched. The building was erasing their progress, as if it wanted them trapped. And then came the whispers. At first faint, so faint they thought it was the wind, but soon louder. Disembodied voices murmured things they couldn't make out. Occasionally, a child's voice giggled from just around the corner. But when they rushed to investigate, the hallway stretched longer, impossibly so, as if pulling them further from escape. Their cameras malfunctioned. Batteries that were fully charged drained in minutes. Flashlights flickered. Footsteps echoed from nowhere. The very air seemed to thicken. The most terrifying moment came when they found themselves standing at the entrance again, but from the inside. They could see the rusted double doors, exactly where they had begun. Relief washed over them, until they stepped through and found themselves not outside, but back in the long hallway with the gurney, the broken mirror, and the peeling wallpaper. That was when Rachel broke down. "We're not in a building," she whispered, trembling. "We're in something else. A loop. A trap, like a maze that resets every time we get close to the exit." Sam clutched his head. "It's not just the building, it's time. We're stuck." Desperate, they tried breaking windows. They wouldn't shatter. Tried kicking down doors. They wouldn't budge. Ava screamed into the void, her voice swallowed by the silence. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the loop seemed to release them. Luis turned a corner and gasped. Natural light. A window that hadn't been there before. Without thinking, they bolted. They followed the corridor, and this time, it didn't twist back. No repeating patterns. No more gurneys or mirrors. They burst out the side entrance, panting, their clothes soaked in sweat, lungs burning. They never spoke of what happened in detail after that day. Their recordings were corrupted. Only static and flickers of distorted footage remained. No sound. No proof. Just memories, burned into their minds. What terrified them most wasn't just the looping halls, the fading chalk, or the vanishing rooms. It was the idea that something in Hillview had noticed them and played with them. That maybe they had only been let go, this time. And somewhere inside that asylum, those endless hallways still stretch on, waiting for the next group to step inside. Waiting for the next glitch to begin. Story 6. The Unseen Patient in the Mirror. The crumbling remains of Hawthorne Psychiatric Hospital stood like a sleeping beast on the outskirts of town, its broken windows like empty eyes staring out into a world that had long moved on. Once a proud institution meant to provide care and shelter to the mentally ill, Hawthorne became notorious for its mistreatment, abuse, and the disappearance of both records and patients. Following an internal investigation that never saw the light of day, the hospital was shut down and left to rot. For over 30 years, nature slowly reclaimed it. Ivy crept up its stone walls, roofs caved in, and rooms were swallowed by dust and silence. But despite the decay, there were whispers that something still lingered within its walls. That's what drew Layla, a freelance photographer with a passion for urban exploration and abandoned architecture. She specialized in capturing the beauty of decay, the forgotten corners of society where time stood still. When she read about Hawthorne, she knew it would be perfect for her next photo series. It was late afternoon when she arrived, the sky overcast and dull, casting a gray hue over the building's facade. Armed with her DSLR camera, extra batteries, a flashlight, and a growing sense of curiosity, Layla stepped over the rusted gate and pushed open the heavy front doors. The hinges groaned in protest, as if trying to warn her away. Inside, the air was dense with dust, mold, and history. Her footsteps echoed as she walked down crumbling hallways, capturing images of the collapsing ceiling tiles, stained mattresses, overturned wheelchairs, and rusted bed frames. The silence was so complete it pressed against her eardrums. Occasionally, she would pause, unsure if the distant creaking she heard was the building settling or something else. Hours passed as she moved through wards and therapy rooms, her sense of direction slowly unraveling in the maze-like structure. Eventually, she came across a door marked Patient Room 108, still legible despite years of wear. Something about the number gave her pause, but she brushed it off and stepped inside. The room was surprisingly intact. Dust coated every surface like ash, and faint water stains trailed down the walls. There, above a cracked dresser, hung a tall, dusty mirror. Its glass was cracked diagonally across the center, with the top half surprisingly clear despite decades of neglect. Layla stepped closer, raising her camera to capture the eerie composition, the broken reflection, the collapsed ceiling in the background, and the skeletal remains of the furniture. But as she peered into the mirror to adjust her angle, she froze. Behind her, reflected clearly in the glass, stood the outline of a person. They weren't moving, but the figure was unmistakable. It looked like a patient clothed in something white and loose-fitting, like a hospital gown. The form was blurred and dim, as if seen through fog, but it stood just a few feet behind her, facing directly toward her reflection. Instinctively, Layla turned around. The room was empty. Her breath caught in her throat. She spun back toward the mirror, heart pounding in her ears. The figure was still there, unmoving, watching. This time, she raised her camera, hands trembling. She snapped a shot, the flash bursting through the gloom. But when she looked at the screen, the photo was blank. No figure, just the empty room behind her. She looked again at the mirror. The figure was gone. A coldness crept down her spine, not the chill of a breeze or a draft, but something internal, like the slow realization that she had witnessed something she wasn't meant to see. Layla stepped closer to the mirror, peering into its depth as though it might offer answers. That's when she noticed something more unsettling. The outline of the patient had not just been behind her, it had been staring into her eyes. The reflection wasn't showing the present moment. It had been frozen in time, like a memory etched into the glass itself. Suddenly, she heard a sound, soft, almost like breathing, just over her shoulder. But the room remained still. A hair-raising static filled the air, and the light from her flashlight began to dim, flickering in irregular pulses. She backed away from the mirror, her eyes still locked on its surface, but the reflection didn't follow her movements. Her real self had moved, but the mirror still showed her standing in place. Still, frozen, just like the figure had been. It was as if the mirror had trapped a moment of her existence, and was now playing it on a loop. Panicked, she grabbed her gear and rushed out of the room. The hallway felt different now. The light through the cracked windows was dimmer, more distant. Doors that had been open were now shut. Her own footsteps echoed strangely, as if out of sync with reality. She didn't stop running until she made it out of the building and into the gray light of day. Back home, shaken but unable to resist, Layla uploaded her photos. Most were what she expected: hallways, beds, walls layered with decay. But when she opened the folder containing the mirror shots, she gasped. In one of the pictures she had taken before she ever saw the figure, the patient's outline was already there, faint but visible. She zoomed in, her heart thundering. The figure was staring directly into the camera. She hadn't seen it at the time, but it had seen her. Layla never returned to Hawthorne. She deleted the photos the next day, but some of them, somehow, kept reappearing. Corrupted, distorted, showing her reflection in places she had never visited. And in the background of each, that same blurry patient figure, growing clearer with each file that re-emerged. Story 7. The distant footsteps. On the fringes of a sleepy town that most GPS apps failed to find, there lay the skeletal remains of Warrendale State Institution, a facility that had once housed over 1,000 patients before abruptly shutting down in the early 1980s. The reasons behind its closure were murky at best, officially due to funding cuts and outdated infrastructure, but locals told darker tales. Whispers of disappearances, unmarked graves, and strange sounds that echoed from within long after the final staff walked out and never returned. For a group of amateur ghost hunters known as the Paraverse Society, the place was irresistible. They had cut their teeth investigating minor hauntings in suburban homes and empty warehouses, but Warrendale was their first big one. A genuine asylum, soaked in rumor and rot. They arrived just before midnight, equipped with handheld cameras, EVP recorders, thermal scanners, and an arsenal of overconfidence. The building loomed in front of them, its brick walls cracked and bowed from years of neglect, windows shattered like broken eyes, vines twisting up the facade like veins on a corpse. They entered through a rusted service door in the east wing. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the air seemed to change. It wasn't just cold, it was still, unnaturally so, like the building was holding its breath. Dust hung in the air, and every step stirred up decades of silence. For the first hour, the investigation was uneventful. Static hissed from the voice recorders. Their thermal camera picked up nothing beyond the occasional rat scuttling beneath the floorboards. They joked, laughed nervously, even split into pairs to cover more ground. That's when they heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, the kind of rhythm you associate with a heavy-set, orderly pacing the night shift. They echoed faintly down the long hallway like they were coming from far away, but just close enough to know they were real. "Did you hear that?" whispered Mia, one of the group's more skeptical members. Everyone went still. The footsteps continued. 1, 2, 3, then a pause. And then again. They weren't random creaks of a settling building. They were intentional. Human. Heavy. They turned to their team lead, Josh, who was already aiming his camera toward the source. "Is someone over there?" he called out, voice echoing back at them hollowly. But no one answered. "Maybe someone followed us in?" someone else suggested. They counted heads. Everyone was present. No one was missing, and no one had separated. Still, the footsteps persisted, always just ahead of them, around the next corner, behind the next door. Every time they moved closer, the sound moved further, like it was retreating, leading them on a path through the decaying labyrinth. Determined to debunk or confirm what was happening, the team began to follow the sound. Down one hallway, then another. Left, right, down a set of stairs that led to the basement treatment rooms. They marked walls with chalk to keep from doubling back. But the building felt alive, reshaping itself, stretching out in unnatural ways. The footsteps never stopped. Sometimes they were faint, other times thunderous, but always just a little too far away to reach. Their flashlights flickered. Mia's watch stopped working. Their sense of time began to warp. 10 minutes felt like an hour. When they checked their phones, the timestamps on their footage were looping back to earlier in the night. Something wasn't right. They turned another corner and saw it again. Just a glimpse. A shadow darting through a doorway. They rushed forward, bursting into the room. Empty. Dust covered everything. No footprints. No movement, but the sound continued, now coming from above them. They scrambled up to the second floor, only to hear it from below. "Is it playing with us?" whispered Jules, her voice shaking, like it knows what we're doing. That was when they noticed the worst part. They'd been following the sound for hours, but the hallways, the furniture, even the graffiti was repeating. They had passed that wheelchair before. The same torn painting of a child's face, half scratched away. The same door with the red X spray painted on it. And yet, they hadn't turned around once. They realized then, they were stuck. Not just physically, but in some kind of auditory loop. A glitch in time, where the sound was the bait and they were the prey. The footsteps were leading them nowhere, or worse, somewhere they weren't meant to go. In desperation, Josh pulled out the last functioning camera and hit record. He narrated what was happening, trying to leave some evidence behind. But when he played it back seconds later, the recording had captured something else. Not just footsteps. A voice, whispering, laughing. Closer now. They bolted. No more chasing shadows. No more trying to debunk what clearly defied explanation. But every path seemed to lead back to the same place. A hallway with a broken mirror at the end, and the sound of footsteps walking away. Again. Eventually, and without understanding how, they stumbled through the service door they had entered. The air hit them like a slap, cold, fresh, real. The silence outside was a mercy. They ran, none of them spoke until they were back in the car. And even then, they sat in stunned silence. Later, when reviewing the footage back home, the team noticed something chilling. In every audio file, the footsteps were identical, the same rhythm, The same pauses. A perfect loop, but at the 1:13 mark of each clip, a new sound emerged, breathing. Not from any of them. A low, rattling breath, like someone or something was standing directly behind the microphone, waiting. The team never returned to Warrendale, and they never uploaded that episode to their channel, because the sound didn't stop there. For weeks afterward, some of them would wake in the middle of the night and hear it again. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3, pause. Always behind them. Always just out of reach.